This actually is the Dev Friday before Christmas, right before Christmas. Christmas, oddly enough, being on a Sunday this year. And maybe I'll even get, maybe I'll get this uploaded before Christmas hits. We'll see. We'll see.
And maybe we'll get the holiday bumper in there too. Did you play
Oh, am I not? Is that not
the
playing for
startup?
you?
No, I can't hear it.
How is that
It's
not?
not Christmas yet, Tim. I can't hear the Christmas
Oh,
music.
I can hear it just fine. I'm wondering why it's not routed to you. Well, this is just what's. But at least you can hear me, right?
This is the Dev Friday before Christmas where everything works.
Where everything works. Yeah, well, we'll see. I'm surprised you
Yeah.
couldn't hear that. I thought I had all the knobs and yeah, but we'll have the Dead Friday before Christmas bumper in there when you listen to the podcast.
Well,
Not
now I'll
maybe
have to
not on the
definitely
live
listen
stream.
to this again because I need to hear it, Tim. My Christmas isn't complete unless I hear that $5 bumper music.
The $5 bumper music. Well,
Yeah.
big stack of things to talk about today, I'm sure. In my mind, I had made a list. I did not write it down because that would be far too much
Who
preparation.
does that?
But we missed last week, but we do have this week, 2 days before Christmas. Mark, what's under your tree?
Busy Christmas time, Tim. I know lots of family plans. That's why I wasn't able to meet with you last week because we had some family come in from Kansas, from the Midwest,
Well,
which
are they
is
escaping
yeah,
the
which
cyclone bomb?
they got here before, right before that, the big Midwest storm hit the U.S. Like a week before. Yeah, they came in, which is the timing was perfect because if they were scheduled to
Wait,
come in this weekend.
Did they go back then?
Yeah, they went back.
Face this, like you sit
Yeah,
back, you're like, no, 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 no. We're going to enjoy this
they flew
weather.
right into the beginning of it. I know it's like they timed it perfectly.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for you, they timed it perfectly. Apparently. Yeah.
And then today we're going to close to the Midwest of PA. Well, not really, about an hour and a half west of here. Don't know the exact town to go to my wife's brother's side of the family is getting together, so we're going to be seeing them tonight. Hopefully, the weather conditions aren't going to be too bad. So busy time with family, but
Not
isn't
going
that
too
what
bad.
Christmas is about, Tim? It's
That's
about family, right?
that's one of the things. Yeah. Yeah.
Other than that, though, yes, finishing up wrapping some gifts, starting to get them under the tree. Just the
Did you did
traditional good time Christmas stuff.
You're ahead of schedule then because Christmas Eve is normally when you buy all your presents. So
That's true. Well, I always have a
you're
feeling
well prepared,
I
Mark.
did buy everything. I told you that I was trying to chip away at this a little bit earlier this year and to try to not be too rushed towards the end of December, getting closer to Christmas Eve. I'm still gonna miss that time, so I may venture out. We'll see. Maybe I'll buy a little present for myself. Who knows? We'll see. But I did buy,
Tomorrow. Yeah.
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 But I
Yeah.
bought all my presents. I have a few more just to wrap up. I have to help the kids wrap a couple more presents for the mom, and that's about it. So yeah, it's
Nice.
pretty
Nice.
smooth.
We've got a busy couple days because today's actually one of our kids' birthday. So she was born on
Ooh,
December 23rd.
Christmas baby.
Yeah, so we'll have cake for her and taking her out for a dinner just with me and my wife. So that'll be what we do today. Tomorrow we've got some plans for the family, and then Sunday we've got Christmas service. In
Mhm.
fact, I was thinking of Josh Miller the other day
Oh, really?
because yeah. So we wanted it this year. Someone at church said that they wanted to do like a Christmas program type thing. So trying to figure out how to do it with what resources we had around, right? And kind of put together a program with different songs, Christmas songs, things like that. And we've got a bunch of kids dressed up like Mary and Joseph, like the live nativity thing. But we don't have a big space, so I'm trying to think how am I going to make it look, kind of give that feel for just a little bit more than just kids standing out there. Give some background or something like that. And as you can probably see too, I don't have my normal light on me because that's actually attached now to the ceiling in
Oh,
the
okay. I
auditorium.
gotcha. So
Two key
you
lights.
moved your office lighting setup.
So yeah, the key lights
Yes.
are the lights because they're easy. You can color balance
Mm-hmm.
them, right?
Yep.
Now it's not
Yep.
all the colors in the spectrum, but you have your daylight balance to warm light, and we wanted to create this nice little like feels like a family, Christmas Eve type thing. And honestly, we were supposed to do it yesterday, but people were sick and the weather was terrible, so we're probably gonna do it Sunday, on Christmas Day. But I was trying to think, how am I gonna just add a little bit because I can't do backdrops, can't do things like that. So stretched a bed sheet between some PVC pipe, and grabbed two cheap projectors from Walmart. Okay, and I have them set up so they are flipped, so it's a vertical instead of a horizontal orientation, and covering the whole bed sheet to make what's, if you think of the aspect ratio for projectors, if you flip them, you've basically got, it's basically a 9 by 8, so it's very very close to square. So we've got that, and put the two projectors. I was so impressed by how easy it was in Windows. Sorry, Mark. I know you're completely into Linux now, but I still run Windows on my Surface. So easy to go into the driver settings, or it's actually the chip. It's the video card chipset like
Hmm.
driver thing. It's so for me on the Surface Studios, on the Surface Studio laptops, there's an NVIDIA driver for the main display.
Oh,
The
really?
actual laptop display is an
Okay.
NVIDIA driver, but for the external video, anything that you plug in through USB-C, or when you plug it to a Surface dock, you get display ports and things like that.
Hmm.
Anything there is an Intel chipset. Um,
Really?
so I just went into the Intel configuration, software thing, and I could select both projectors and say, "Hey, pretend they're an actual screen."
So you're running two projectors from one Surface,
Oh
Windows
yeah, two
Surface?
two projectors, and then
Is it like
but
a
I was
US?
able.
Is one of those video USB-C setups?
No,
Is
no,
that
no.
what
With the
it?
Surface, dock, you have display
Oh, a
ports.
dock. Okay, then you have
So I
like
have
two
two
display
display
ports coming
ports.
out of
Yep,
that.
yep.
Wow. All right.
And I was able to put up the two projector screens. But then the problem is, like, what I'm going to do for backdrops is basically going to be a Prezi, which is not Prezi. I say Prezi. It's Sozi. It's my Inkscape version of Prezi, right? Because that allows me to kind of change the backdrop by making it look like the scene is shifting.
Yeah.
And I would love to know how to do stuff better with animation, but this is just the tools that I am familiar with. I know you probably have some 2D animation tools you use, but able to take that. I was just going to throw it on a browser, make it full screen. But the problem is if it's just one projector, if Windows thinks each projector is their own screen, full screen just goes to one projector. So I'm like, how am I going to make it span two projectors? And just a little googling, yep, I went into the Intel settings and told it take these two screens and treat them as if they are one screen, and it did it. And now
So
Windows sees two projectors as if I go into my display settings in Windows, I have my normal screen for my Surface, and then another kind of really weird squarish, not normal aspect ratio screen because it's two projectors that are bound together. And I just move the output over there, full screen the browser window, and control it from my Surface.
so I'm curious about the performance of this. So you're basically the Surface is basically powering three different screens, like the
Yeah.
Surface screen and the
Well,
two
keep in mind,
projectors.
this is not like a Surface Pro, although I think the Surface Pros would do this well. This is the Surface Studio laptop.
So when you're moving windows from when you're across the desktop, when you're spanning them between the
Yeah,
projectors and through, oh, and also with the Surface Display, is the performance pretty good?
I
It's
haven't
not
noticed
too
any problem.
laggy. It's
No,
like, well, it's smooth. Wow,
no.
it's
I mean, the
impressive.
Surface Studio it's a hefty laptop.
Okay, all right.
So it's not like in the Surface Studio laptop. It's not like the now you like the you're using a Surface laptop, right?
I use the Surface Go, which is a little bit underpowered, but it's meant to
But
be.
you
It's
use
meant,
the Surface
yeah.
Go laptop, not the Surface Go,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And that's
yes.
the difference too. Is like the Surfaces, everything's in the screen, and you don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that there's power in having a full keyboard. It's the fact that they can stick better hardware in it when you have that space, right?
It's true. It's true.
And that was the one weird trade-off with the other Surface laptops. No, Surface Book, I think is what they called it, right? Was it
Mm-hmm.
the Surface
Yep.
Book?
Yep.
One of them
That's
it could
correct.
disconnect from the base, and it was
Yeah.
weird because sometimes you had better hardware, sometimes you didn't. And that's what I like about the new kind of flippy thing that they have with the Surface Studio. A laptop is it's always it can go into a tablet orientation, but it's still connected. It has the same hardware. It's not like your software is all of a sudden disconnected from more of its hardware. I feel like they actually put a better graphics driver in the keyboard on that older, the disconnecting one,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you'd have more power when you're connecting for display, which is kind of weird when you think about why'd you disconnect it. You disconnected it so you could really write on the display, and then by disconnecting it, you lose performance. So, but
And
anyway,
it
a
sounds
lot
like
of
you
Josh Miller because I'm doing projection mapping, essentially. Kind
projection
of,
mapping
not
onto a
really,
sheet.
onto a sheet. Yeah, yeah. But I felt like this is something Josh would be like, oh yeah, I've done because he used to projection map all over things. I found that
Yep.
really interesting too.
Yeah.
I thought I
That's
saw he did a display someplace with somebody
he was in I think it
on
was
a
in
building, right?
Chicago. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was doing something before I don't know, it was before Thanksgiving, but they him and another artist, they paired up and they did skyscraper in
Yeah.
Chicago and they projected out the whole thing. So,
Reminds me, remember blinking lights way back in the day?
mhm.
The
Yeah, so
like you'd control lights and people well they'd wire up a skyscraper with lights in every window and you could play Pong or something on it.
so
He,
there was one thing, Tim.
yeah.
One thing I did that was on my list. Actually, there's a couple things on my list. So if I have I always have some show
Wait.
topics.
Is the top of your list disconnect from your VPN?
I already did that. I'm on top of that today. My audio, my video through the browser wasn't working correctly, but yes, my VPN is disconnected.
VPN's good. All right, cool.
But a couple of things on my list. First thing, I think Christmas came early for you a little bit this year.
Christmas came early for me a little bit.
Yeah, I saw the news on Twitter.
Saw
I'm not
news.
posting much on Twitter anymore, but I am following. I am following
okay,
Twitter.
Yeah, that was a topic that should be there. Yeah.
And I saw, wow. So you were talking about how PHP Tech is coming back online. What
Right.
is it? It's in May, right? Or March or May? I don't know. Sometime in
it's in May
2023.
May
Okay.
2023. The last PHP Tech was 2019. So this is
And
like 3 years without having a tech.
And I first saw that you had a speaking workshop or panel with your fellow
Right.
phone burner crew.
Yep. Me and
Doing
another
some
dev at Phone Burner
PHP,
talking
like
about-
what you guys learned from doing it APIs, which I thought was kind of interesting because I do have a couple of API questions for you that we could also get into. But then I just saw, wow, you're like headlining the thing.
Yeah, I'm giving the keynote, so I'm really excited about that. I was not prepared to talk about this, but I'm really excited about that because, I mean, PHP Tech has had such, and this is my hope for the keynote. So we'll just say we'll make this a clip if we ever make clips on our podcast, which we don't yet. But if we did, we'd make this. Or is it a chapter? Is that what it is? It'd be a chapter, right? It's had such an impact on my career, and my hope is to weave in a little bit of not a little bit. To weave two things together. One is this idea that by viewing the things in our life not as things that define us, but more as the tools that we have, and then what defines us is what we do with them. So not saying I'm not going to be defined by maybe the fact that whatever athletic ability I was born with, or in my case without, right? That's I'm not gonna define. I'm just gonna say that's a thing that I was given. Now what am I gonna do with that? But not just like those physical characteristics that we have at birth, but like just the opportunities that come across our lives, the things that we're entrusted with at work, or looking at it as less of this is the job that I have, and more like this is the job that I've been entrusted with. Now what am I going to do with it? Because looking at it as if I've arrived because I have this title kind of stifles us. Or I've not arrived because I don't have this title. Instead of looking at it and saying, well, this is what I do have. Now, how am I going to use this to be, to accomplish whatever I want? Because that's really, if we think about success not as to where we are, but as to what we've done with what we have, and just change our viewpoint around that. And then with that, weave in a little bit of the story of how tech has impacted my life. Because this is actually kind of an odd thing too. Like this look, this beard, is
It's your thing.
It's from tech.
It's your thing, yeah.
And
it's a trademark.
It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the first actual talk that I gave at Tech, like that was on the schedule, was me talking about how I was a contract developer and how that all worked, right? And my perspective on being a contract developer. And one of the students from Kutztown, I had illustrate the talk. And he
yes.
drew a picture of me. And the picture of me kind of showed what I at the time had, which was a goatee and a little closer beard. So it was like this beard, but with a little longer goatee coming out. And that then became something that I was kind of known for. So then this just grew. And I'm sorry, it's the podcast. I should probably say that when I say this, I'm talking about the length of my beard. So
you were like the tech Samson. If you cut your beard, you're going to lose all of your developer abilities.
Nope, all out the window.
So you have to keep it for the rest of your life until that day that you truly become a farmer and you leave PHP behind.
Like a farmer would also have the beard.
It's true. It's true.
Maybe I don't know. But yeah, so I'm hoping to weave those two stories together, and then the story of 12 years ago was my first tech. So
Wow.
10 years ago was the first time that I spoke at a tech, at least in the main conference, and the impact it's had, the relationships, the people that I've come to know through tech, how that's impacted my career. So and then give that to the audience with this idea of, well, if this is your first year here, this is the opportunity that's in front of you. What are you going to do with it?
So I'm curious how this came about. Did you pitch this talk and then they just
Yes.
decide to make this the keynote, or is this something they talked, they were interested in? Oh, we need a keynote speaker. We know you, we have a good relationship with you, and they reached out.
So what many of the PHP conferences do is a call for papers, where people submit the talks that they would like to give. So I submitted multiple talks, including the one with the coworker on API design, HAL, and client and server side, on that. And another one I'm giving on HTTP Tortilla, which is an open source project that PhoneBurner released. That is, it's kind of interesting and unique in the PHP space. Some things that we do there. But the keynote, I pitched both, like, outside of the call for papers. I since I know the organizers, said, hey, if you're looking for it, here's my idea. Well, I think it was more like, I have an idea. I kind of pitched a little bit of it. I said, where do you want me to, I put the abstract so you can see the whole thing. And they changed the call for papers to actually have you could submit a keynote idea. So
Oh,
I
really?
submitted it there. Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep. And I'm guessing there were some other of the keynotes that came from that as well. So super happy to be. I'm kicking it off, and then a friend that I've met only through tech, Chris Tankersley, is giving the closing keynote. So
Well, unfortunately, I'm definitely not going to be there.
definitely not gonna be there. You should be there though. It's in Chicago. Well, you got
It would be fun. Honestly, I've been to Chicago in years, and I've actually since I know I drove through there a couple times with my family, but mostly I spent some time like when I was there in high school. But yeah, it's a fun town. But anyway, I don't think that's not on my schedule. I don't think I'm going to be there. But I'm hoping, since they are getting back in person live, they're going to have some nice streaming capabilities.
That's the hope. I
I
believe that
hope
we're trying to stream it. So
that'll
maybe you
be interesting
can
to watch. I'll definitely be watching it. So
maybe you can pick some of that up. Yeah. What else is on the stack over there then, Mark?
my stack of topics for today.
Yeah. There was one that. Oh, there was a couple actually in my mind. But you go. You go.
Well,
'Cause I
let's
got.
continue on with because the other talk you're going to be doing is around API design.
Oh, so you have questions on API design?
Yeah, because I was thinking about this because I talked to you about
I feel
how
like this whole podcast is just like this way to
I'm just
be
learning how to be an API
consulting for
developer.
free. Yeah.
Yes, I need I'm a front end developer. I don't know how to do APIs. I need somebody assistance. So that's why I get you on the show. We could chat about it. It's consulting for free, Tim. Yep, it's a service. But I was since school's over, or at least the winter break, and we were talking about the previous week. I have some time for some side projects. Getting back to my sitebuild.io, chipping away at it, and
Not a sponsor. Not a sponsor.
no.
Yeah. Not.
And I started, and I've gone back and forth about how I want to approach, because like I definitely big component of this is having the no code editor component part of this, so that I could have a visual editor using Grape.js to be able to design layouts and templates and to be able to do it. So I'm working on that to basically have like a saving capability to that. So if you have, working through Grape.js, have a way to create an account and be able just to do some basic saving of the templates that you create on there. That's task one. Then I was like, okay, once I have that working, what's kind of the next step that I wanted to take with this? As web developers, we always go back to wouldn't it be nice to have a platform that hosted websites on? Have you ever thought about that, developing one of those for yourself, Tim, over the years? It feels like for some reason I always go back to that.
To throw HTML and stuff,
or like to host websites. So if you build out your design of your website, it's sort of like a Squarespace,
okay,
which is basically what I would be doing. And I was like, but then I go down. That's where my mind initially goes. But then I go down that path of like, do I really want to be hosting people's websites?
No,
I don't. I don't know why I always go there, but I'm like,
money in that.
But then I always kind of pull back saying that's stupid.
Wait, but you're already saying you can save a template someplace.
Yeah, basically, and the template's just HTML, CSS.
Right, but now you need to spit out what is essentially a static site that's generated
Correct.
off of your AI.
And that's where I want to get to, because since I've, the past couple of years, I've been building a lot of static websites, primarily with Gatsby and React, and really liking that experience. The one thing I don't like about the experience is I have to feel like I have to repeat the fundamentals each time. Like I have to rebuild the wheel each time when I start a new project off. especially when I start to build out the templates, right? So it feels like I'm just kind of doing the same thing over and over again, even though I could build out like a starter project or template project and start one project from that, but then I got to maintain the template project and it just becomes a huge hassle. So that's why I like the idea of having like a no code visual editor that could and eventually basically convert this HTML and CSS into, let's say, a React template or a Gatsby template, right? And that kind of can solve that problem. And that'd be kind of nice too if what sitebuild.io could do is could just be able to generate the static website, right? So give you a little bit of a content management aspect to that to be able to, when you update images or text, and be able to then take that. We talked about generating markdown that then could be used to then to render the static site and then deploy it to, let's say, Firebase or whatever static hosting you want to do. But that's like long term. But I was thinking about how I also wanted to start to plan to chip away at some of these features. I want to start designing an API for it. Also, because I'm going to be teaching my advanced
An API to do what? Like, so if I'm following it, you have to have some front end, and this is actually really intriguing to me. So you have to have some front end that says, "Hey, I'm going to build my template and hit save."
Correct. And that's primarily going to initially just be done on Firebase. Right. So I'm still going to be
Even
in
that you could expose through an API, which is kind of nice
correct.
because then you're saying, well, this is my template builder UI.
Correct.
But
So
what I'm really, as a service, what I'm really providing is once you have a template and you have AI, I can put the two together. So if you design your own visual editor, you can still use our service. Throw your visual editor there as long as you give us templates. What
yeah.
I guess that's what's the core of the business. Is the core of the, or not? I don't want to sound too.
No, it's more like a
what's
tool.
The core of the
Yeah.
tool is
Yeah.
template plus AI. So
Eventually.
you may start with a way to say, oh yeah, we give you a way to build your template, but you could build your template your own way as long as you can push it up through the API, and then AI takes over.
So initially, the way I'm just bootstrapping this, just like I said, I'll be using Firebase authentication, just using Firebase, their Firebase DB, just to basically just store the HTML and CSS, just to save like the templates I make. That's the first raw version of this. Where I want to get to, where I feel like I need an API, and then also hosts, maybe use a data store, not just use Firestore DB, or to use like another database, but to have like an API around it that provides more added functionality that also is not tied to Firebase. So the one thing I don't like, even though I love Firebase as like a static hosted kind of platform, for me to post or to submit applications and to have them statically hosted. But I also feel I don't want to be tied to that too. I don't want to have all the functionality locked into one platform because that just locks you in, right? Like, so let's say if I want to go to another provider or to have more of a multi-cloud kind of a development component part of this. So I don't want to be tied just to one platform. So having an API that can provide me functionality of saying, managing the build process of like when I wanted to build the website, know where it is in the build process, also know where it's going to be pushing it to, let's say it would be Firebase or would be Netlify or AWS Beanstalk or whatever, they're kind of their static hosted solutions. So I want to be able to have a way of API that would be outside of Firebase or that could hold a lot of the functionality.
Right.
Also thinking about how I'll be teaching my advanced web class in the spring, and I do have to teach some basic API design with that with PHP. But I'd be doing a little bit of dog fooding of this.
Only you knew someone who does API design in PHP.
So my question is,
talks on that very topic. Yes.
So my question is, what type of advice or recommendations would you give to a PHP developer? Maybe, let's say, mid-level. I could consider myself maybe mid-level, even though I haven't touched PHP for many, many years. Let's say
a developer. You understand
yes,
language.
I could look at it and be able to, and then just give me a week or so, I'll be hitting the ground running with it. What would be some good patterns or advice do you could to start to build out a very basic API and start to get that work? Because I started to take a look at like Laravel, and they have some templates or some type of patterns you can kind of follow using the frameworks. Yeah. Laravel, did I say Laravel? Laravel. Like I said, I'm not a PHP developer, Tim. But I know, or should I just do this just like I prefer JavaScript now? And when it's outside of React, just do pure vanilla PHP.
Yeah. So that would be my recommendation. I would say if you're a person saying, first of all, like I have a whole lot of interesting questions around the API design side of things. And especially if you're teaching API design from a PHP standpoint, I would attack it from saying, let's design the API first. Let's ignore the implementation completely, because I give a talk about this. I don't know if it's in this. No, it's like a training. It's a 1 day training kind of course that I've done in the past.
And when you say design versus implementation, are you talking about just design the interfaces first and
Design the
then actually
API,
then
ignore the
implementing the
code.
actual functionality of it?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because we get in web developers, we get in this incorrect mindset when it comes to APIs because of where we come from. Um, we build when it comes to either server side rendered. It doesn't even matter if it's server side rendered. We're moving away from server side rendered, right? But we kind of come from that idea of where we've learned is, well, you have a template, you have data, right? You have some type of template manager that allows you to say, take your data, shove in the template, render an HTML page, push it down to the user. And as we design it that way, what we're actually saying is, I want to be able to not change any of my business logic code, right? I want to be able to not change any of that, and decouple it completely, so I can change the template however I want. Like we optimize it so the structure of the HTML we push down to the client is easy for us to change kind of willy-nilly. We may never even test that. We test a lot of business logic, but when it comes to what we push down to the client, we make it very easy to change because we want to be able to have flexibility there. Where somebody says, hey, move that button. We want to be able to move that button. Cool, it's just a template. It's actually extracted, so I can change all that and not have to worry about all the code that's really important that I don't want to change. When we go to design an API, it's exactly the opposite. Because an API, the structure of what you push down should never change. I mean, unless you actually have a breaking change, you're saying I'm changing my API, right? But we should structure code in such a way where I can say rewrite my entire code base under the hood, but I don't change what gets pushed down to the client because that is the contract. So it's a flip of a mindset where traditional web development with server-side rendered pages is I want to make my code very robust and I don't want to have to change that, but I can easily change what I push down to the browser because that's what we want. When it comes to APIs, we want to say, no, I want to make sure I don't change what I push down to the client, even though I may change everything behind the scenes because I want to say, oh, wow, we are getting slammed with these requests. The way that we wrote this isn't performant at scale, but I want to be able to remove and replace all the code that powers it, but not change the format that I push down. So the thing that is unchanging is exactly the opposite when we go into API design, which is why I'd say the first step, if you want to teach this, at least the way I would teach it, the first step is say, what does our API look like? Let us document that.
Now,
Let us write it
when
down.
you say the contract or the data that gets pushed to the client, you're not talking about the schema of the data or the data structure, or are
No,
you?
I'm talking about the like I'm guessing it's going to be a JSON API. It doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
guessing you're going to structure it with JSON. I'm saying let's talk about this is what the client expects. It expects these 5 parameters or expects this body. This is how I'm going to give it to them. This is what it's going to look like. If there's relationship between resources, how am I going to traverse them? Am I going to expect the client to figure out that an ID here means I
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of construct a URL, or am I going to go the hypermedia way and say no? The client should just be able to look at a property that says links or something similar to that and say, oh, if I'm at a pet, say I'm at Garfield, the pet resource, I want to find out who the owner is. I just look at the links property and there's a
Mm-hmm.
URL. I don't have to figure out how to construct a URL to get to John Arbuckle's resource. I just follow a link to it. And if we design, I love designing it that way because then there's so little the client has to do. The client doesn't have to. You don't have to preload the client with this idea of, well, here's where you find owners, here's where you find pets, here's where you find this other
Oh, so you're
thing,
saying you're
and
going
you
to be
grab an ID and then you concatenate it together because that will certainly lead to somebody doing it wrong, thinking your API is broken and it's not. So just having all of this design up front. Don't even start writing code. Say, if we want to build an API that powers this thing, what is it going to look like? And in your particular case for sitebuild.io, not a sponsor, but you could go there. It's a site, has a coming soon, I think. There, right? You're saying that you want an API to be able to push it to these different static hosting solutions, right? It feels to me like what you really want is 2 APIs. One API to export it, and then another API that can consume that API and send it someplace else. So
Really,
like a
initially the API would also would manage the content management component part of it. So if
oh
a
right, where
user
you're
wants to create a
pushing
page or
right.
create like a category or a list of articles
They have
on there,
existing templates
yeah.
in your and we're not thinking about how that
That's
works.
where I think I would need an API, not just for the build process, which absolutely will need that for like the managing of the sites and the building of them and kind of keeping track of that, but also for just doing the content management component part of it. Because that's the
So
next step too.
here's a piece of content.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say before writing a line of code, well, what does that look like? What is the structure of the resource that is a piece of content look like? How does it relate to other content? How does it
Hmm.
relate maybe to categories? Are categories their own thing? Do we have an API for categories, or is it just basically a tag? How are we going to solve that? And start figuring out what it
So
looks
would
like.
you
Document that with an open API spec, which is just the new
so would you
label
first
for
start with
Swagger.
just start designing the URIs?
I start with designing the resources, like the structure. What is it that because that's the most important thing. And from I'll
So
use
you have an
this.
endpoint and then you define the structure within what that
I don't
endpoint's
even
going to be
define the
returned.
endpoint.
Oh, you keep that even open.
Just start doing the resources. What is it that because that's the most important thing. That is the thing. And when I do a talk on what really is, people say, hey, it's a RESTful API. Most APIs that say they're RESTful aren't really RESTful. A RESTful API versus an HTTP API or a web API. A web API just uses HTTP as as the language of communication,
Hmm.
embraces methods and
Hmm.
headers,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean it's RESTful. A RESTful API embraces the linking nature of it as well and says you don't have to worry, client. You don't have to worry about URIs. You don't have to worry about endpoints. All you have to do is know one URL, and if you go there, you can traverse to anything else that you might need to find. It's not magic because you still there's still the contract, the thing that is shared between the client and server. It's not just like just one URL and it can discover everything. No, no. The thing that's shared between the client and server is every single piece, every single resource both have to understand. But because that is the essence of a RESTful API is both sides of the contract understand the resources that are in play. I start with that. So for your like, what's the content? What is that going to look like? What is it going to contain? What are the things that are going to be related to it?
So going back to pre API days, are you talking more of the pattern of like if I was going to be designing a database,
Mm-hmm.
I would design the tables, I would design the relationships between them, design where what are my keys, what are my foreign keys,
But
and
even
design the
before that,
relationships between them.
you should design
And
the
what I'm thinking about,
domain.
so are you going? Is it more like that idea? If I
It's
when I start with developing a system or application, I may start with the database component part of it, design the data first, and then put in
but
the implementation top
I'd
of that.
even in that concept take it a step higher and say the database itself is an implementation detail. Design the entities or whatever you want to call the
Hmm.
objects that represent your domain in the domain data. Design that and then scratch your head and look at it and say, well, what's the best way to store this? Is it a document store like Mongo? Is it a relational
Mm-hmm.
database? I don't know. Let's talk about the things, the objects, those business objects.
Hmm.
And domain-driven design people call those, your I think they call them your entities,
Hmm.
and talk about what they look like. Model the world in a way that looks right for your purpose, which is actually one of the things I'm going to talk about in the PHP Tech keynote. That we model things, and we can model the world however we want, so it's useful for us. Like you can model and say, as a developer, we say, well, it's a user. User has
Well,
what? Has a name and
Well,
has a
that's what I was trying to say. Because, like I said, I started off as a database developer out
right,
of
but don't
college. That no, but I'm not saying that the implementation part of it. I'm just saying from a
right.
design perspective, that's where my head goes.
Yeah,
Right.
talk
So
about
I'll
the
go back
data.
to there, and then I just think about the structure of the data, the structure of those objects. Even though that in my world that'd be database tables back in the day, but I would think about the what do those tables look like? What are the relationship between the tables, and then develop the functionality off from that. So is it
Right.
kind of are we talking about the
Yeah, I
similar?
just wouldn't tie it to relational database. I
No,
just feel
I'm
like
just saying in a very general way.
describe the things that you're gonna and for you it's gonna be there's gonna be a piece of content.
Or I could say UML. Kill Joy one
You
was start
could, yeah,
modeling with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You got a piece of content. What is gonna be in it?
Yeah.
What are the because that seems like you're saying I need to be able to actually fill out these templates with data. I need content pieces. Well, what makes up a content piece? Are they all gonna have a title? Are they all going to have a body? Is the body
Hmm.
HTML?
Hmm.
Is there are there tags that give us information about it? or are there not? Are there categories that you can only have one of, tags that you can have multiple of? Start figuring that out, and then that once you have that idea of, okay, here are the resources that the client and server need to be talking about, then you can start saying, and we, you're like, in day to day, we do it a little bit differently than what I'm describing here, because we don't necessarily come from an API completely first perspective. It is, we need to be able to do something. So to do that thing, we need these objects on the server side. Now the
Mm-hmm.
client needs to be able to interact with that. So we already have a domain that has the modeled the way that we need to see it from the server side. Then we have to say, well, the client side needs to interact with that. How do we model these same things in a way that makes sense to the client? Sometimes they're very transparent. They're almost the same objects. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes we say, hey, the client wants to do something and it considers it, you know, there's say 4 options really on the server, but the client has a fifth option, which is just a convenience option, which is a specific kind of configuration of one of the other options. Okay, the API can model that as a completely separate option, but when you select it, just as it transfers it and kind of maps it back to how the server side looks at it, it goes, oh, that's a phantom option that just means configure this thing in this specific way, which makes sense to the user. So in that context, you can say, well, first I got to model the system as a whole in a generic way. How's it going to work? And that may be more server side um,
Mm-hmm.
oriented. And now, how does the client have to see it? Because that's just a representation for the client that should make sense for the client. But around API design, then start saying, well, how does the client see it? Let's then make that a very a concrete specification using something like OpenAPI, because once you do that, you unlock
Well,
the potential of
when you and I do want to move to the actual implementation, saying we're how are you take those next steps with
we'll get
actual
there. Yeah,
PHP.
yeah.
But when you're in this beginning design phase of API design, how
Mm-hmm.
also do you are there any, let's say, guide rails you should try to follow? So because I have been in a system where you could over design it too, and also design solutions that you shouldn't don't really even need to be solved, in a sense where you might over design the problem.
Right, right.
My approach to, especially since I've been doing this for a while now, is actually let's design the most, that MVP, right? That the minimal
Simplest thing. Yeah.
viable problem solving component that we need to get that working first, and then build on top of it. Also build in a way so it's flexible, so you can build on top of it. It doesn't become like a monstrosity that you have to kind of deal with over time. So what are some kind of safe design patterns you should try to follow, especially kind of starting small, but also allowing it to build bigger too?
That, I mean, start small. Just keep the relationships that you need, right? If you say, hey, maybe it needs to relate to this other concept in the future, but it doesn't have to do it now, don't worry about it. Keep in mind that from an API perspective, I tend to embrace the notion that any additive change to an API is not a breaking change. So if you're going to say, oh, in the future we may want to add these properties, cool. In the future, add those properties. That, in my mind, doesn't break the API at all. You added more information, it's not breaking. If you say, well, in the future, may want to look at this completely different, cool. In the future, look at it completely different. That is a completely different resource. It's not the same resource you just designed. So you don't have to worry about, as much as
Oh, I see
possible,
what you're saying. So you
do
could
it in a
say,
way where you
so let's
never
say
have to version it.
I get to the point where it's like, oh, this relationship isn't right. I like this other relationship. You could just say, okay, well, you're not going to get away with the previous relationship. You're just going to adapt, maybe take these two objects, make them relate in a different way, but you're going to make another resource out of it anyway.
Make a completely different resource.
So it doesn't really
Deprecate the
matter.
old one eventually,
Yeah.
but avoid versioning as much as possible because that adds complexity that you don't want to worry about. So if you're like, oh, you know what? Instead of thinking of things as content pieces, really what they are is, I don't know, something else. Metadata. All right, we'll make a metadata resource that pretty much represents your existing content in its new form and then deprecate the content thing eventually, but don't try to make version 2 of content. Just say nope. We're rethinking it. It's a
Hmm.
different resource. And exactly like you say, for relationships, if you want to model the relationship, and it's not just a simple, hey, we're going to link to it, we're going to say, hey, we're related this way, and create a new resource that models that relationship. If there's more than just the two objects that are related, if there's metadata around that, make that when you need it, right? But yeah, I would say anything that you're like, well, that'd be nice to have, maybe throw it in a different spec that isn't
Hmm.
the one that you use, and say, okay, in the future maybe we'll have this. I also, if this is down the road, more implementation. But there are certain things like if you talk about hypermedia APIs, we've found it very useful to tell the client that if there's any embedded data, don't worry, don't expect it to be embedded. And we use some interesting patterns to make it useful without the client knowing about that. And that'll be in that talk that you're referencing them giving with the coworker. But then when it comes to the implementation, though, because I know you're interested in that, once
I'm
you have
chomping at the bit.
API specification that you want to build in PHP, I'd say just avoid all of the frameworks, um, because you don't want to get, especially if you're teaching this, you don't want to teach a framework. You want to teach
Yeah.
the ideas. And the truth is, if you look at the PHP, the PSRs, which is the PHP standard recommendations, there are a bunch of interfaces that kind of help you do some common things. There is an interface for an HTTP message, which allows you to say, "Oh, this was a server request. It has all the headers, has all the parameters. You can get the body from it, all that kind of fun stuff."
Yeah.
And a HTTP response, which is like, "Hey, this is what we're pushing back down to you." That's one. Now, don't implement that yourself. Find a library for that, but don't get a framework. Just get pick the library that you like that implements the PSR7 interface, so you can have requests and responses. And then there's a a PSR for middleware, and that's PSR 15. And it defines the signature for middleware, which just says, if you give me it defines two interfaces. One is a handler, which says if you give me a request, I will give you back a response. That's so simple, right? That is what web servers do. You give me a request, I give you a response. So it has a handler, and then it has what it calls a middleware, which the middleware says if you give me a request and then a next handler, I will return to you a response. And at that point, the thing that fulfills that interface, satisfies that interface, has the opportunity to say, well, I could just ignore the next handler and I could just return my own response. Or I could pass the request that you gave me to the next handler. When it gives me a response, I could look at it and I could manipulate the response I got. Or I could manipulate the request and pass it on to the next handler. And then it comes back and gives me the response. I could just pass the response back. Once you understand how that pattern works, you can create a middleware stack with like 30 lines of code, if that. I mean, it's actually, if you look at the PSR, there is an example middleware stack that's right there. You can just copy and paste and use that. And now you can build a whole API where you really understand how it's working, because there's not a whole lot of other rules around. There's not a lot of other configuration or convention, to try to figure out, I'm learning this framework. No, you just have a response object and a request object and all your code that pulls it together. And in that, you're able to write some really understandable code. And that's the pattern I would take. I give a talk on both the PSR the 7 and 15 interfaces and show how you can build a lightweight API
And from
nothing more than your own code.
And from a documentation standpoint, looking at the phpfig.org.
Yeah. Yep.
That'd be your recommended kind of place to start.
Oh yeah, just look at the PSRs there for 7 and really it's for PSR 7 you want to find a library that you want to work with that implements PSR 7. But like I said, a library, not a framework. I mean, there's frameworks that you can pull the library out of it, but you just need to be able to wrangle the global variables in PHP into a request or a response object, and then bring in the PSR 15 interfaces and implement them yourself. And then you have a very understandable API framework that you have built. And once your student, if you're talking about teaching this to students, once your students understand how that process works, they'll be able to hopefully write it without getting lost in all of the, all the rules and all the complexity, which are good. A lot of times it's good helper functions and things like that, but you learn the framework. You don't learn what's really going on. Here, they're going to learn what's really going on.
Yeah, I remember when I taught this last time, I taught it with Python.
Okay.
With Python and the Flask, which is a kind of a small micro framework. It was pretty easy to use, and it worked well for kind of building out a simple API. And when I got the students into Postman and try to show them the process of kind of seeing the request and seeing the data get posted or put and sent back and forth, it was hard for them to take, because these students are really they're just learning how to do like server side rendering with PHP. That's really all that they know. And trying to then take that next step to understand how to pass the data back and forth using HTTP and using these patterns is was a really big leap for them to take. And so that's also the thing I'm trying to think about the complexity of this, of trying to keep it as simple or straightforward as possible, both from my perspective too, as of learning it and kind of relearning it, and also trying to implement something with the PHP, because actually, or an API with PHP, because I've done it in other languages. Like I said, Python, did it in Ruby in the past. Those great languages that are made for API design.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, remember?
Oh yeah.
But I haven't actually done it with PHP. I've mostly just used frameworks with PHP.
Yeah.
So going back to that, thinking, well, what is the kind of the most straightforward, simplest approach? Like I said, maybe using a couple libraries here and there, but staying away from the frameworks, because I agree that just adds a whole lot of complexity on top of it that you don't really need to deal with that at that point, especially with students who are just
Yeah.
learning this for the first time.
If they can
So
wrap their mind around the middleware interface and
yeah.
how it works, and what you can do with it, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of value there. Like you
Is
said,
there any additional resources on top of the phpfig.org that you'd recommend?
um, there's this one guy that gives a really good talk on those.
What's his name?
What's his name? It's me, Mark. It's me. Yeah, that's it. I would go through the example code that I use for that talk, because it shows how you go from just a really simplistic
So I had to
hands-on.
go look your
I
talk
don't know
up
that
on
it's up.
YouTube.
I don't know if it's on YouTube anywhere. I'll see if I can find
Oh,
it someplace.
you should have it posted somewhere. That's what I'm saying. Like, how can I
I
find
don't
it?
I don't know that I don't know that it's been I don't know that it's on any public. It's a lot of times it's with the conference. If it was streamed, it's part of that package. But there may be one. I'll see if I can find it. I'm trying to remember if I did it for this one that everything was just public on YouTube. I'll poke around and see if I can find that if there's a link for it. So, but yeah,
All right. All right. I think that is some good suggestions. So I'll keep you updated as I
yeah.
journey into the P2 world. Maybe also one thing you can kind of leave me with here is also,
Mm-hmm.
because like I said, I'm more of a consider myself a neophyte polyglot, which I like to dabble in many languages, but become an expert of none. Uh, what do you think kind of what gives PHP an edge when it comes to API implementation compared to other? I know you're just PHP, so maybe your high could speak to other languages could be you can't do this much. But from your experience, what is using PHP? Because also I'll talk to the students saying, okay, you've learned how to use PHP from a server side perspective, or just a server side rendering perspective. How it's really being used now in the industry. Why is PHP why is it good at developing APIs? Or a good tool that could be used to develop APIs with.
Right. I'm so glad we prepared for all these questions. That one's
I'm prepping you for your talk, Tim, because I know these kind of type of questions may come up,
yeah.
or maybe
No,
come up
these
in
one won't at
conversations
all.
at PHP Tech.
No, no, not this question. At least not for that talk. But the really, it's like what makes PHP a good web language, and a lot of it is the community and the body of code that is already out there. And the fact that even when I'm saying roll this yourself, don't use a framework, just
Hmm.
embrace the PSR7 and PSR15 interfaces and roll it yourself. You could still look out there and say, oh, I want to handle inbound OAuth. Okay, there's a library out there that uses the PSR7 spec and probably PSR15 that'll let you insert that into your own framework because of the fact that it's this common middleware interface. Say, oh yeah, there's an adapter for that, so I can just bring in this other library, and then all of a sudden now with a little bit of work, I have OAuth, authentication from my API without having to say, well, I have to bring in a framework because the framework then has that. No, I can probably just bring in a library
Yeah.
to do it, and the glue code to get it to work together is going to be really simplistic because of the way PHP and the PHP community has kind of coalesced around some common frameworks, or not common interfaces, even though haven't always liked it. But they've at least introduced that. Okay, yep, we can maintain compatibility across this common interface. That has added a lot of power. Truthfully, too, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that Composer and the dependency management for PHP is excellent in terms and in contrast maybe with some other languages. Um, And then the fact that it is, what makes it still relevant? Why would you want to work with it? Because it is a continually improving language. I mean, PHP 8 introduces a lot of great supportive features, cleans up some things. There's some of the changes that have happened between the 7 and 8, in those versions, have added a lot of power to the language. So it's not a dead and dying language. It's a very active and well maintained language. So
Well, they did make personal homepages for with it in the past, so
there
I
you
would
go,
agree.
Mark. There you go. There you go. Well, we've got 10 minutes left.
I know. Let's bring it back to Christmas.
I went out and looked at Christmas lights last night.
Did you?
Oh, it was so much. It was so much fun because me and my wife, we were out. We had to drop something off, and we went by this house, and you could tell like the lights were. It was a little bit more than what you'd normally expect. Like the flash, it wasn't just like, oh, they're blinking.
Hmm.
They're doing a little bit more. And as I turned around to look at them, like, oh yeah, it says tune to, and the FM station. So they were syncing their lights to whatever Christmas music they were broadcasting from their little transmitter, that I'm sure was FCC compliant. Um, so last night we bring the kids in and we turn to the radio station first, and it's got something from what Disney, like one of the Frozen 2 songs is playing, and they're like, why is that on the radio? And as we pull up, they can kind of see that this house has Christmas trees with mouths and stuff,
Really?
and they're
Wow.
singing the song, and they're like, wait,
Wow.
it's what's on the, so for them, just that moment of magic.
Hmm.
I know you and I know how it works.
Hmm.
They've got it. It's a computer, it's some software and a hardware controller syncing, up to the timing of the song, and they've done all that work, and now they're but to them, to magically hear something on the radio that across the street at this house the lights are in sync with, was just like, how does that even happen? So that magical moment was amazing, and all that has me thinking is I've got a huge field out there that, man, I could do a little bit of
Do you
that.
do
So
anything with Christmas lights?
no,
For
I mean, I'd love
yeah,
to, but
yeah.
I don't yet. But
I
I'm
usually pride myself on a nice display. I have a good set of lights I put on around the
yeah,
house. But this year, because it's been so wet, and it's a
yeah,
combination, it's been so wet, and also I use so many extension cords and like uh kind of splitters with the power
right, right,
cords.
right, yeah.
My GFI plug for the outside keeps flipping every
Oh,
time it
does it really?
rains.
Oh, yeah.
Something in my whole connection system of my lights here shorts out every time it rains. So they haven't actually been up that much because every time it rains, they go off.
They
So
go on, yeah. So, but do you do any of the controller stuff, or is it just like just lights?
the most thing I just have a couple Wi-Fi. I love the outlets you can put outside that are Wi-Fi
Yeah.
connected,
Oh
just
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I could just schedule them and just kind of manage that way. Because that's awesome. Once I did that and got away from the timers, and I could just have an app that
Oh, we
that
could turn
connects
them
my
on and
lights,
off and stuff.
just
Yeah,
either turn them off when
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not at the house, or just set them on just a simple schedule. It's I don't have to think about it. It just works. I love that.
Nice. Yeah, that's. I mean, I wish. Yeah, I've tried some simple stuff in the past. It's like, around my house, I feel like that's just so hard to get it around windows and things like that. But I'm definitely like considering what I could do out in the field with some, because you put up the pole and have the lights come down to create like the light trees and
Oh
things like
yeah, you'd have
that.
enough room for that. That could be
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, yes. That's what I'm thinking. Like what I could do there. I'm also thinking I've really had fun with the projector thing, for the Christmas program. It's like I wonder if I could do, get a waterproof enclosure and some cheap projectors and actually put something together and have it
Yeah, because
timed
your
and
house is like
yeah,
on a hill.
yeah, yeah. So
It's like a
I've
house on a hill. It's a mansion on a hill.
mansion. Yeah, that's what it is.
And I could imagine you doing some type of nice projection mapping on top of your house, your property, that people drive but down that road on the bottom of the hill, they can get a nice little show, that nice little presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to hit the house with the projector as much as just like put some like outside simple screens or something, like where you could really have it like sync with music or something like that. I don't know. My mind's turning, and that's probably bad because I've got enough to do. But yeah, that was last night. That was really fun to see and dig a little bit into. It looks like there's one, I don't want to say protocol, or one chipset for individually addressable LED lights
Hmm.
that a lot of, it seems like, is very popular. And you can get strands of them and hook them to controllers, and I guess
Hmm.
because they're all individually addressable, I'm guessing you should be able to just hook them in series and still, up to a certain point, address all the lights. And I'm guessing that's what people are doing, because you look at these effects and they're pretty cool. And there's some open source light control software that looks interesting. So I dug in a little bit last night, and that's like I say, that's probably dangerous for me to do.
Well, from a hardware perspective, you might have an easier time with. I read online, I think it was last week, that the Raspberry Pis. I'm not saying you'd use a Raspberry Pi for this, but like because you could use a lot of different type of controllers. But they're finally coming back in stock.
Are they really?
The distribution channels are finally starting to get itself worked
I
out.
thought I saw some headline too that they're not going to release a new Raspberry Pi in 2023 because they just want to catch back up or something
Yeah,
like that.
and I think that I think the distributors are still limiting how much can be bought at one time. But the fact that they're going to be back in stock, which I've been waiting for that, like I talked about, I would want to do my own little mini cloud inside my
that's right.
house
Yeah,
of like 4 or 5 different Raspberry Pis next on my server rack and be able to kind of tie them together and do some nice, fun experiments with them. To have a nice development stack, my own cloud stack inside my house. But I haven't been able to get a hold of any Raspberry Pis for that. So
It has been, the chip shortage has been pretty tough.
and I know we're going to talk about the New Year's resolutions, and that
But
might be one of them. Not this
week.
episode,
Not this week,
but and like I said, you need another week to really firm yours up.
Oh,
I think.
Yeah. No, lots of thoughts been poured into that. There was one other topic I had. It's kind of Christmassy related. Did you see the headline of the mom who was going with like the Girl Scout troop to Radio City Music Hall to see the Rockettes?
No, I
and
did
got
not.
kicked out.
Really?
Yeah. Facial rec. Get this. This blows my mind. I think I'm gonna with like 2.5 minutes left. I'm gonna throw this one out here. Facial rec identified her, and then you see that's at the headline. Like she kicked out because facial recognition. You're like, well, what evil person was she?
Mm-hmm.
She worked for a law firm that is currently suing the company that owns Radio City Music Hall. Right?
Wow.
So because the parent company owns Radio City Music Hall, however their CCTV works, identifies her, that she's done nothing wrong, but just can from that tell where she works. They escort her out of the building. She's not involved in the litigation. She just works for the law firm that is also one of their clients is suing not Radio City Music Hall, but the company that owns it. And they kick her out so she can't see the Christmas program with her daughter and the rest of the Girl Scout troop. And it's like, when you think about like just how mind-blowing that is, that imagine the fact that as you walk through a store, if facial rec can figure out who you are, match you to an online profile, now all of a sudden that store knows a whole lot about you. You think cookies and tracking, where you're going online and then getting the retargeted advertisement is one thing.
Yep.
If company, and I'm not saying it's illegal because you're walking into their place of business. It's just fascinating where we've come. Oh, and that was the other topic I want to talk about. We have no time left. Have you played with ChatGPT?
That was the big talk. I have not played with it myself.
You should just go to the example thing and start asking it some questions.
I saw a lot of people talking about it this week. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I saw a tweet out there. Somebody said write me an email for a new customer of AWS who has recently had a security breach. And it spat out welcome to the AWS platform. Here's why you should use us. Here's how we're secure. Here's what's all this stuff. And it was pretty amazing. One thing I thought you'd find interesting is I saw another developer say, I'm struggling to build this regular expression.
We've all been there.
How do I do that? He was asking on Twitter, and he's like, I should have realized. I should have just asked ChatGPT. Because he did. He said, how do I write a regular expression that strips this out after a dot, and it's like, this is how you do it. Here's a regular expression.
So it can actually output code?
Yeah, it told him in a conversation almost like a developer docs. This is how you do it. So Merry Christmas, folks. The AI is apparently... Oh, and that's the other thing I want to talk... so many things. We're from an art standpoint... I don't know. Can you hear the music? I can hear the music.
I can't hear music now.
We have 50
No Christmas music for Mark today.
What in the world? Why not? I don't even understand why that's not going. I mean, what if I turn that knob? Still no Christmas music?
I'll just get to listen to it back to hear the joy.
I'll have to listen back. 30 seconds left. All of the AI generated art. Interested in where you stand on that, coming from an art perspective, because I would love to generate not raster art but vector-based art. I don't know that anybody's doing that. I'm super interested in that, but we're out of time.
I'm 100% for that because I want to put every student of mine out of work eventually.
And Merry Christmas to you too, Mark. And with that, we will bring it into, well, not the next year, but next show will be almost next year.
And
we'll
maybe
see then.
you could still it'd still be the season, Tim. So maybe I can eventually hear the music on our last show of the season.
But we're out of time. I'll have to bring that back. I don't understand how that's not working because I'm hearing
I don't
it.
know. It's like so the
And
audio is
this is supposed to. Oh wait, what's the source? Maybe my microphone source is wrong. I hadn't thought about that.
oh, I hear something in the background.
Audio, default microphone. Oh, that's why.
Oh,
Now you.
Whoa.
Yeah. What happened there?
I'm gonna blow my ears out. It feels like everything. I can hear your whole room now.
Oh yeah, it went from taking it directly from this to taking it from here. So how's that? That's probably better. And then this you should be able to hear.
Yeah, there it goes. Yeah.
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 All right. I'm gonna end this.